So verse 16 says, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." This verse is such a wonderful promise for us as believers, both Jew and Gentile, in Yeshua. Amen? Amen. What is more, in my opinion, it is so practical and easy to understand that it is incomprehensible why more Christians, why more believers are not following its rich spiritual truth. Let's be honest, people. Most of us as believers, and I'm putting myself in this camp as the guilty as well, we simply do not avail ourselves of the power of the Spirit the way we ought to. We coast too often, right? The Spirit gives us this boost as we press in and we encounter breakthroughs in the Spirit, and then instead of continuing in our walk in the Spirit, what do? We kind of coast under our own power, not realizing that the Spirit is actually just kind of taking a side seat, or a back seat sometimes to the actions in our lives. If we are to be obedient to God's ways and love our neighbor like Paul says, like we ought to, then we have to live by the Spirit so that we can allow God to empower us to subjugate our stubborn flesh. There's no way around it. There's no way around it. This is what we have to do. Paul has stated this very same principle elsewhere in his writings. Let's read about this idea of the flesh and the Spirit and our responsibility to one another in the book of Romans chapter 8, verses 12 through 14. This is such a wonderful passage. "So then, brothers, we are debtors not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die." Speaking to believers here, both Jews and Gentiles in Messiah, right? Paul goes on to say, if you live according to the flesh, you will die. You'll be devoured. Like he says earlier in the book of Galatians here. "But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God," Paul says in Romans there. All who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. That's Romans 8, 12 through 14 through the ESV. I say in my commentary, to live by the Spirit means to walk by the Spirit. They're synonymous terms. Live by the Spirit, walk by the Spirit. Be filled with the Spirit is the same concept of being saturated, being overrun or overempowered or overflowing with the Spirit. It's to be filled with the Spirit. Let's keep talking about. We're gonna talk more about Spirit filling below when we get to verse 18 in my commentary. We're gonna take a whole section and just talk about being filled with the Spirit. For now, let's look at verse 17 of Galatians chapter 5. Paul says, quote, "The desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh," right? There's this opposition. They're at enmity. "For these are opposed to each other to keep you, the believer, from doing the things you want to do." End quote. All right, let's talk about this. We could just spend all day on verses like this, but I don't have time right now. You're going to have to go back and read passages like this and correspond them to the passages in Romans on your own. Here's what I have to say in my comment to verse 17. Paul would have us understand here in Galatians chapter 5, verse 17, that once a person surrenders to Yeshua, whether he's Jew or Gentile, doesn't matter, a war between his old nature and the new nature starts. That's when it begins. When you surrender to Yeshua and the Spirit takes up residence within you, like we read about in Ezekiel 36:27. When the Spirit comes within you, that's when the battle starts. And the flesh battles the Spirit, and the Spirit battles the flesh. Such a contest might lead one to despair and wonder if there will ever be victory for the child of God in Christ this side of heaven. If this is the way it is going to be from now on, right? I don't know if you've ever been in that place, but I have before, where some days it seems the battle's more than I can handle. And I just throw my hands up in desperation to say, God, if this is the way it's supposed to be, why did you even save me? Why are you even keeping me around? Just take me home now. I can't, I can't handle it. And sometimes I feel like I'm stressed beyond relief. So I go on to say in my commentary, but Paul already gave us the answer to the dilemma of dealing with our stubborn flesh. And it's not about doing penance. It's not about endlessly saying prayers and rituals and rosary, thumbing through rosaries and beads and saying mantras. And it's not about even attending church on an endless basis or going to youth group after youth group. It's not about memorizing passage after passage. It's not really about something external so much as Paul gives us the answer to the dilemma. What is it? Live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful flesh.